Hello and welcome to a slightly impromptu Dr. Squee show. So, in the last couple of weeks, we lost not one but two great legends of British TV, film, stage, everything you care to mention, and even musical and the charts as well, which we could include in that illustrious mix. We're going to be talking about Bernard Cribbins and David Warner. There's only one man which I could think of who could do justice to such amazing figures. So he can be currently heard on BBC Sounds in Damned Andrew, and he's the star of Big Finish Audio Drums and Coronation Street. He's a stand-up comedian and, of course, a historian of British TV actors, and you can catch him on his regular stand-up night and at Manchester's SX Malarkey. Please welcome back to the Dr. Squee Show, Mr. Toby Hadoke. Toby, how are you, sir?
Hello, I like historican. It sounds like one of those phrases an American academic might give themselves. Yeah, I'm a historican on Doctor Who.
We're going to go with it.
Take it.
Like you, we were just comparing war wounds of both recovering from COVID at the moment. So I'm just going to use that as my blanket excuse at the moment. What excuse I'm going to use for the other however many episodes I've done this show, I don't know, but we'll never mind that right now. So
you don't need an excuse.
We don't at all. So we're going to be talking about Bernard Cribbins and David Warner. I mentioned David Warner a bit in last week's show because he just passed away, but Bernard's left us in the meantime. So just to give him his real propers, Bernard Cribbins, 75 years in the entertainment industry, 122 IMDb credits, an honorary BAFTA, over 100 episodes of Jack and Nori, worked with two different Doctors Who, 60 episodes of The Wombles, several more on old Jack's Boat, and a couple of charts hits. It's not bad for a career, is it?
Oh, I just loved him. And no, it's a great career and a testament. And it's only when you sort of dig deep with people like that, because they're always there. So you just think, oh yeah, he's the voice of the Wombles, and he's that guy off that thing, and oh yeah, he's in the Dalek film, and then oh yeah, he's in that episode and then you suddenly realise the sort of breadth. Because he was such a sort of recognisable figure as well, with that voice that you just knew, and he was on the British Telecom commercials as well as Busby, I think, wasn't he? So that voice sort of resonates. So you're sort of one of those people you kind of take for granted until you take a step back and then go, but that's, that sort of career doesn't happen by accident. He was really talented, but wore it very lightly. He was just amazing. What a career.
There's I never got to meet the great man apart from in passing at a con once, but there was a couple of times when I was almost going to be hosting panels with him twice, where unfortunately it was later on in his career, and unfortunately due to ill health he pulled out. But I think it's a credit to what a person of the people he was and what an accessible character he was, even though he loomed so large in British acting history and comedy and all this, that I always felt like it was going to happen someday, just because I had a couple of cancelled kind of pass by meetings, and he seemed so accessible as a person. I think that is a great skill as a person, that he feels like anyone's got a chance to talk to him because he's just one of those people.
Yeah, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody on Twitter or social media or Facebook, it may have been even before this week, had just coined the phrase that he was the sort of person everybody wanted as a granddad. And I think that's a really good description, whoever coined that. But interesting, I did meet him, but I sort of feel, it's funny, I kind of feel like it was kind of blown on every occasion. So I still feel that I have that kind of sort of deferential gap, if you like, because I did an episode of Loose Ends with him, but where we were both sort of guests and I had to do a bit of performance. But we only kind of, and he had a minder with him, and we shared the lift together and we sort of spoke, but it was, we were both guests on a show. So that was I was like, well, at least I've met Bernard Cribbins. And then I met him at the 50th in the green room, and I thought, well, I've got to take this opportunity to have a chat. And then I got a phone call that I really had to take, and because I was sort of wanting to not be rude, I sort of feel I slightly overcompensated, and he was very nice, but I sort of went, I think I was a bit of a prat there. And then I interviewed him for the Lenny Mayne documentary we did for the Blu-ray, but that's a bit of a day's work, and I got my eye on the fact going, I haven't really got a decent photo of me and Bernard, so I hope Chris or somebody from the production team goes, oh, you two boys, to do a picture. So I got that in the back of my mind for sort of the whole of the sort of non-filming bit, and nobody ever did. And so, and Michael Williams, who worked on it, did take some photos with my phone of us sort of chatting, but he was looking at some stuff on the table. So it's me sort of looking at the camera and him sort of doing that. So I never quite got a sort of a sort of moment with him where it's just like, but the Cribbins, Toby, you know, and so I feel like I sort of slightly missed out, which you know, in the great scheme of things is nothing, but it still is. It feels in the same way that you sort of feel a kind of so near and yet so far. I kind of have that as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and it was actually one of my favorite things, which I've got little keepsakes, is a letter which I wrote to him asking about being on the show, kind of separate to any convention or anything. And he just written on the note in hand, he'd written this very lovely response about how I'm afraid he didn't really understand working on video, which we were kind of proposing at the time, or going through Skype or whatever it was. And he said, but thank you so much for asking. And just there was a friend of mine who jokingly sent him a CD of his music as well. And he just wrote back this kind of joking reply, because he said about, it's like, oh, you could play this or use it as a bird scare. And he goes, and I will indeed take up your suggestion. And it's working famously as a bird scare as we speak. And just that like loveliness of taking the tone for people that I think people remember him for so greatly.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and you don't get to be, you know, that much of a national treasure without having those elements about you. But actually, there are some performers who you think who convey loveliness, who then you sometimes hear horror stories about. But everybody seems to have loved Bernard Cribbins, and you know, the stories are legion of him being on a set and knowing everybody's name. You know, even when he was, you know, in his mid-80s or whatever, that sort of old-fashioned, you know, politeness that you know would be forgiven in age, if not in status, if he didn't do. Do you know what I mean? You'd sort of go, well, even, you know, he's polite, but I don't expect him to remember everybody's name simply because he's 85 or whatever. But no, he's still you know, I don't think anyone's had to dig too deep to find lovely stories. Barnaby Edwards did a lovely thread on Twitter that about, you know, their various encounters, and there's lots of warmth coming through, which I think is delightful.
Yeah, there was a lovely one where he did Jonathan Ross's radio show. Whatever happened to that? Anyway, he did Jonathan Ross's radio show, and he was talking about reappearing in Doctor Who after he'd done his main run, and then Donna and he and the Noble family were all coming back. And he talked about the theme music. I don't know why this particularly stuck in my music. It's just because I don't imagine anyone was like, make sure you mention that we've jazzed up the theme music a bit. But it was just that little attention to detail which showed he really cared about doing this. It wasn't like no job seemed to be just a paycheck for him at all. It just all seemed to be about caring and make sure he memorized the notes about what he was talking about with it and this sort of thing.
Yeah, he was a professional, you know, and that's not to be sniffed at, and is often not in as much supply as you would hope or think. Of, you know, of the old school, you know, that cliche, they don't make them like that anymore. Well, I you know, I think sadly that they certainly don't make them as frequently and as well, you know. And I almost, and it's weird because I almost felt we were lucky to have got him before Wilf, in a way. It was like, you know, he was that sort of tangential thing going, well, yeah, I mean, it's Bernard Cribbins, but at least, you know, he was in the movies, and it's not quite Doctor Who, but, you know, aren't we lucky? And then he did The Big Finish, the brilliantly titled Horror of Glam Rock. And the cast is him, Stephen Gately, Una Stubbs, and Claire Buckfield. I mean, what a brilliant cast.
And very eclectic.
Yeah, and you sort of go, okay, so we had him in the movie and we've got him in A Big Finish, great. But then when he popped up, and I believe I'm right in saying he did Voyage of the Damned, and I think brought some of his own props and his own hat with him, because
yes,
bro. And I think when the sad fact it became apparent that Howard Atfield wasn't going to be able to carry on playing Donna's dad, I think it was Phil Collins. I'm sure I read somewhere or heard Russell say that it was Phil Collinson who went, well, Bernard was so good in Voyage of the Damned, why don't we get him to, you know, play a, you know, and Russell maybe went, oh yeah, it could be a grandfather or whatever. But I think it was that. So it was him actually saying yes to a one scene cameo.
Yes.
Probably 12 lines, you know.
And apparently Kylie Minogue was dutifully starstruck by him, which is lovely to hear.
Great. And him turning up and do that and go, you know, no such thing as a small part, you know, or whatever. Turning up for his day to do a bit of Doctor Who at 3 o'clock in the morning on a deserted street. That led to the magic that is Wilfred Mott, who is frequently the best thing about any scene that he's in. There's a phrase I coined when I was reviewing one of the box sets in Doctor Who magazine that I was quite pleased with. His eyes twinkling with magic and tears, because there's something heartbreaking about him, and there's but not a saccharine. It's not, that lachrymose quality isn't saccharine or self-indulgent. It's there's something really beautiful and life-affirming about it. My favourite scene, I think one of my favourite scenes in the whole of Doctor Who is, and I was thinking because I do an in memoriam video at the end of the year, and I sort of, what clips could I use of Bernard Cribbins? It's like, what clips am I going to have to leave out? Because there are so many. But the scene in Turn Left, where Rocco, the big-hearted Italian, is putting on a brave face because they're being put in the lorries and taken away, and he doesn't want anybody to know what he knows, which is that he's Fucked. So he does this, we're going and we're going to be sewing mailbags and it's going to be fun. And Dom doesn't quite understand, and he's putting on a brave face for his family because they're a bit scared. And he's been set up as this big, ebullient figure, and that's very, very deliberate. And then he just looks at Wilf, who knows, because Wilf, was alive during the Second World War and all of that sort of stuff. And they salute each other, and they exchange a look that goes, we know how bad this is, but we can't say anything. And it is a scene that gets me every time. I think it's quality acting from Bernard Cribbins and Joseph Long, who plays Rocco, and I think it's an extraordinarily grown up scene in a series that's about someone who travels through space and time in a police box, and people have insects on their backs, and bins eat people and all of that sort of thing. That's the beauty of Doctor Who, that it can do all of that, and none of it sort of tonally dissonant. And then there's that brilliant bit in The End of Time, when Claire Bloom say to him something like, and you fought in the war but you didn't kill anybody, and he says something like, well,
that like it's a bad thing.
Don't say, and I believe that some of his talk about his wartime, his national service or his wartime experience was some of Will's stuff there was based on conversations that Bernard Cribbins had with Russell. And we forget the things that they're a dying generation now. I mean, Bernard Cribbins was 93, but we have touched the flesh of people who lived lives and went through experiences we can't possibly.
Well, I was a fan of that too, apparently. But one of the things which Russell T Davies also talked about was, because apparently he did carry this kind of box of props with him, or suitcase or whatever, through loads of the Doctor Who episodes. And he said, hey, I've got this idea for you. What about if I went after a Dalek with a paint gun? And that bit just came from a random suggestion that Bernard Cribbins thought was a good idea. And it was brilliant. And it's so great. And the fact that it seems so triumphant, and we've seen paint being used on a Dalek eyeball and various bits of food and loads of other times. And he does this, and then the second afterwards, the Dalek just burns it off. So not only is it a wonderful comedic, great little bit, and something which sort of pensioner might be able to do to fight the Daleks, but it also gets to be a way of them saying, it's like, no, the Daleks can't be fooled by that anymore. And it all just came from a random thing which Bernard said would be cool to see.
And of course, he built up his part so brilliantly that, because Donna's family are sort of side characters, but they're good parts. And then but to the point where for David Tennant's last episodes, he's essentially the companion. I mean, he gets billed at the front of the show, doesn't he? And it's a real testament to how great Wilf is, and how anybody with any eye on anything goes, this is really special stuff here. That Russell T Davies goes, how do we get rid of the most successful Doctor in the eyes of the public? That this is going to be a seismic television event. David Tennant was Doctor Who, had been Doctor Who for a very, very long time, really stamped his mark on it, and Doctor Who was at the height of its popularity with the public.
Yeah.
Let's have this amazing big explosion. No, let's have a silly old man stuck behind a door. And that is so perfect. That is so perfect, and the fact that it's Wilf makes it really perfect.
Yeah, and he even says in that moment, and it's almost kind of getting me right now. It's just when he says, it's like, well, don't just leave me. Just you're more important. Just leave me here. And of course, the Doctor, being the character that he is, he would never leave the person behind.
Yeah.
And it just
brilliant choice, brilliant choice. And it's it's great writing, but it's also the seeds of that are sown in the fact that you can't not love Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah, and you mentioned him saluting, and that moment with Rocco. Also, in his last appearance, when they find out that they've got the winning lottery ticket, and he just stands there, tears in the eye, and just salutes to the Doctor, and that's been used as a meme. And it's just every time I see that, just the amount of emotion he conveys in that quiet moment.
And of course, because we can't get a good goodbye scene between Donna and the Doctor because of the nature in her last episode, because he's had to wipe her memory, so you don't get the great parting between them. So that emotion has to come from Wilf saying to the Doctor, she was better with you, and him acknowledging, and because Donna's mum, so you can go now, and Donna just goes, yeah, bye. You need Wilf there to sort of go, but yeah, no, come on, this is important, and I know that you're hurting, and that lovely moment between those two men, and he salutes on the doorstep, doesn't he? And it's raining on the Doctor, and again that really gets you, and again the emotion is being provided by Bernard Cribbins, the sort of the funny comedy actor, the Jackanory man,
which as you mentioned, like he was originally meant to be in that one-shot deal. It was only because the actor who was playing Donna Noble, Catherine Tate's dad, sadly passed away, and I'm sure he would have done a wonderful job, but only because of that we got this wonderful run with Bernard Cribbins, which everyone loved. It just it's just so good. I would like to touch upon just a few other bits which he did over the years. So the Railway Children, this is one I'm not as familiar with, so I was wondering if you might have some remembrances of this.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I couldn't tell you how long ago it was since I last saw it, but it's one of those wonderful sort of wholesome, emotional, charming British films. Directed by Lionel Jeffries, another of those great sort of British cinema figures from the time, and he's just lovability in a is he the porter in a porter's uniform? I can't say much beyond that, because again it was sort of part of, it's like so much of what he did, it was almost sort of part of the televisual landscape that you took for granted, and it's only looking back now that you go, God, there were so many little special things. That was a sort of film that you watch as a family, We were quite a dysfunctional family, but actually we all watched television together and talked about what we'd seen and recognized the actors and all of that sort of thing. And it's it's a much loved movie, and I think they've tried a few remakes, haven't they? And it's they've never quite captured the magic of that one.
And actually, ironically, you look perfectly placed to be in the engine room stoking the coal with your neckerchief today.
And even we've got to acknowledge, even his name is somehow sort of funny and quirky. I mean, my dog is called Bernard. I have a fondness for many a Bernard in my life. But Cribbins as well. Bernard Cribbins.
Yes.
It's a perfect name. And I don't know anyone else called Cribbins. It's a brilliant name. I don't want to know anybody else called Cribbins. But Bernard Cribbins is a fantastic name for Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah. It already sounds like a granddad, but it also has got that hint of vaudeville about it, which I loved it. This was the other thing which I really loved about him, was that even though he knew how to build up the seriousness needed in the scene, there was always that hint of his vaudevillian stage show background in every performance. There would always be a little kick of the heels or something else that you do in the performance, which just add that little bit of levity and that joy into it.
Well, I have to say, from when I was a kid, we thought of him as a comic turn. I mean, him doing Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD was a bit like Roy Castle doing it. I think I don't really enjoy Roy Castle's performance in Doctor and the Daleks, it seems to slightly overvalue the pratfall and the double take.
Yeah.
Whereas Cribbins, I remember my brother saying, "God, he's good in this, isn't he?" Because I think there was the suspicion that because he was a comic performer, that he was there to lend a bit of lightheartedness to it, and he does, and he has that lovely sort of comic storyline of he doesn't foil the robbery, and by the end he does foil the robbery, and but actually he treads that fine line of he does the comedy stuff without it ever being annoying, but when he's doing the serious stuff, he's full on 100% serious, and it was always a very pleasant surprise that this, as we viewed him at the time, comic turn, came into our very serious children's program show, and actually made it serious when it needed to be, and judged it properly. It's only later through the years that you go, oh yeah, he's a fine comic actor, but he's an actor. But nonetheless, I still think it was a hugely pleasant surprise at just how damn good he was at Wilf. It makes sense now, but it's really nice that we were given that opportunity to see him, lay that much genuine sort of emotion and just reduce you to tears all of the bloody time. But as you say, he has those comedy whistles. He has, he's a proper. I don't know if he was trained. No, he just went into the theatre when he was 14, didn't he? But you learn on the job. He could sing, he could dance, he could do all of that stuff. So he had the technique. So he had all of that experience dripping from his pores and at his disposal. And it's one thing being able to do it. It's another thing having the nous to know when to deploy it so that it doesn't. Roy Castle again. I don't wish to denigrate Roy Castle. I love Roy Castle. He was great, but he tips over too much into the comedically hapless. I think to the expense of the drama in that first film in a way that Bernard Cribbins doesn't in the second.
Well, I'd say Castle was more of a wonderful showman and a presenter and all these other things. He wasn't necessarily the greatest actor. I'm sure he had some wonderful turns and everything, but I always knew him more for the likes of Record Breakers.
Yeah, song and dance and music, and playing the doodah.
Yeah, and even saw him. I saw him at Pontins, I think it was, where he was doing a live show, and he just had everyone eating that out of the palms of his hand. There's no doubt he did.
Yeah,
well, but he didn't have that acting side, which
I love Roy Castle. I just wished he'd been a bit better in Doctor.
Well, one of the first things which brought Bernard Cribbins the attention of the BBC was doing a BBC musical showcase, and he did a couple of films with Peter Sellers, Two-Way Stretch and The Wrong Arm of the Law, where he got to bring to the surface those kind of more comedic, more kind of slapstick elements. And you even see, again, when he was doing Doctor Who, he said it's like when he did that first scene of his main run, and he looks through the telescope and sees Donald waving from the TARDIS.
Yeah.
He purposely put in as many little kind of kicking heels and little dances and stuff as he could fit into like a 10-second little moment. And those are great comedic performances where you can see him indulging that kind of side of himself.
Yeah, and he also has, and I think that's why he's popular, and there's something about his face, and particularly the look in his eyes of slight haplessness, slight pushing against the odds, doing his best. There's an element of I keep thinking of something like that, the sort of comedy like the Plank and all of that sort of stuff, where he might fall over or he might struggle, or he had a kind of layman's heroism about him in a way. Do you know what? The sort of ordinary hapless individual who will nevertheless still try and do his best, and then when he slips up, it's quite funny as well because he's lovable.
Yeah, and you had to care about why this guy who's carrying a plank around is hitting himself in the face, why we actually care about him, and he could convey that. I think there was a time, which hopefully we've kind of moved past a bit now, where comedy series got very very nasty, really. It was all about really not unlikable family characters who didn't like each other. There's a specific example I can give, which I won't because I don't like to do that as much as I can avoid it. But like just these sitcoms where just every member of the family seemed to hate each other. There was nothing why you knew at the end of the day why these people sat at a table together, why they actually loved each other. You have to have that even when they're getting completely fed up with each other. And Bernard could sometimes do that without even having a scene where you even highlighted why. He just was that lovable.
Yeah, innately lovable, and I guess, you know, that's the man. That's the man oozing out through the technique. It's a great combination.
I did want to throw a couple other ones. So the song "Right Said Fred" I thought is endlessly charming. It's the fact that today you can still listen to it, and even though a candelabra on the piano to hold the candlesticks might not be the most up-to-date reference, the meat of the song is so relatable, of two people just trying to get a bloody piano up the stairs.
Yeah, and again, the fact that somebody somewhere said, "Bernard, we got a song for you to sing." He went, "All right, what's it about?" It's about some people trying to get a piano up. All right, that's the sort of thing that in other hands wouldn't have any sort of pull or charm or anything. The fact that it was Cribbins and that song and that tune, and what's the rhyme? First remove the handles and the things will hold the candles. I mean, that's a great rhyme.
I love, and it didn't bloody get well. I never thought it would.
Yeah. And again, it's that trying your best as everything falls apart around you, and it's utterly charming and utterly. It's alchemy, because it's impossible. You could sit the best, most groundbreaking writers, producers, marketeers, packagers, zeitgeist professors, number crunchers in a room today and say, produce something sort of timeless and charming. They would not come up with that in a million years. That was a sequence of events that could only have happened around Bernard Cribbins, and yet it's a song that will live forever. And every time it comes on the radio, which it does very, very rarely, but it does, not fail to put a smile on the face of the people that hear it.
Brilliant way of putting it. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Jack and Ori a bit. So I heard, actually, you mentioned, so what was that show you mentioned which you were on with him? Because I had an episode of it.
Loose Ends.
Loose Ends, that was it. Because they had an episode of that which came up, I don't think it was the same episode, but one with Bernard in it, which I think it was his last appearance on there. And he talks about Jack and Ori. And he was saying, it came up on BBC Sound, so you can hear it now if you want to check it out. He talks about Jack and Ori and about how he got the cameraman to move the camera a bit closer. He purposely kind of like beckoned to the camera, and he made it all intimate and all close. And he talked to the young people and goes like, "Are you ready? Oh, that's good, because I'm just about to tell you a story." And he'd have this conversation with them, which of course was very one way, but would never feel like it because he made it so intimate.
I think, and didn't he say, "I just imagined I was talking to one child"?
Yes.
And, you know, again, that's magic, and it's so sweet. And I don't think you can play down the importance. It's really hard to understand now. I don't want to play the old soldier, but in those days, you could have the television on all day and only find a handful of things as a child that were remotely interesting. So you had to catch stuff if you were lucky. I mean, some people got the radio times, we couldn't afford it. So sometimes you just had to happen upon things, or you had to remember when stuff was on. But then with something like Jack and Ori, it was a lottery depending on who you got and what the story was. So the old favourites, when they came back, that was always a bit of an exciting thing. But when you did find something, and I grew up in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and I'm not an outdoorsy person. So I was a bit stuck, really. But this isn't unique to me. I've got loads of friends from all sorts of different backgrounds to whom the television was a place where you could have a 15-minute highlight of the day. You know, somebody took you out of whether you were a bit bored, a bit lonely, you know, kicking around looking for something to do, looking for something to connect with. You didn't have the sort of contact that you have with friends even now. Folk, I mean, God, you had to apply to your mother to use the telephone, you know, and then you'd get timed and it would get written down how long you were on it for. So those moments, and people like Bernard Cribbins and his voice, Michael Horden's voice on Paddington, Richard Bryars on Rhubarb, there was a certain sort of avuncular authority that also brought with it a sort of comfort and eccentricity, all wrapped into one, that was immensely important when you were looking for something to sort of connect with in a way. And the fact that he was used so often for that sort of thing was because he did have a sort of special magic that he cast over kids of a certain age, and then the ability to remain so fondly held that translated into adulthood as well, and becomes comforting nostalgia.
Yeah, I mean, I happened to catch when I was working as a support worker, I happened to catch him on CBBC's Bedtime Now, which one of my clients was watching, and he was. I couldn't tell you the story for the life of me, but he was playing this rat who was the lead character, and just his performance still, I can remember that. Like just this thing which I happened to catch on TV, and he made this kind of like really intense voice, and he just didn't lose an ounce of pace. And this was around the era of him doing Doctor Who, so later on in his life. And he just never lost any of the energy to do it. And I'm sure the same was in Old Jack's Boat, which I'm sure I've only caught a couple of clips of over the years.
Well, and he was all the Wombles.
And the Wombles. The Wombles.
They're all distinct characters, and they've all got Bernard Cribbins' voice, but it's a slightly different intonation, And
I felt that was really kind of like, I don't know if anarchic's the right word, but certainly something which is challenging the status quo, to have on primetime children's TV, to have these characters who are about conservation, about recycling, about all these issues, which, we're creeping into the conversation of the moment. But when the Wombles first started, I don't think was of the stage where everyone was going, it's like, no, we've got to get kids involved with this.
Oh God, no, absolutely, well ahead of its time. But they also had about them a sort of, I just seem to recall, wasn't Orinoco a bit useless or a bit naughty?
Yes.
There's a haplessness, there's a naughtiness, there's it's without it being in any way sort of goody two shoes. It again comes with it that sort of slightly slightly eccentric, slightly flawed people. I mean, if you could call the Wombles people, creatures, doing their best, but also messing up, but being charming while they do it. God, I haven't seen Wombles for years.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, one which I did just want to mention, it's one which is kind of one of these lost gems, I think. It's something which doesn't get remembered very well. There's a film called Blackball, which Bernard Cribbins did. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was Paul Kay, who'd just done Dennis Pennis at the time.
Yeah.
It was quite big. And it was him, Bernard Cribbins, and James Cromwell. And James Cromwell was playing this very well-to-do bowls player who was very kind of like about the very strictness of the sport. And Paul Kay played this kind of wild child guy who was like shaking up the sport and end up going on mainstream TV, being sold to America. You get Vince Vaughn appearing as this guy from America who becomes Paul Kay's agent. Really an amazing cast.
Not seen it.
It's so good. Please do check it out. But you've got Bernard Cribbins who comes in, and 1 minute he's with his grandson. So they play painter decorators who do bowls in the spare time, and Bernard Cribbins is the guy who got his grandson into the sport. And he, at 1 minute, they're having a giggle over the fact that Paul Kay's written tosser on the side of the plate. Obviously, a double meaning on the game of bowls. So he's giggling along with him. He's going, it's like, and then you wrote, he's going to say it, tosser. And you got Bernard Cribbins just giggling like a schoolboy. And in another scene, to your point before, he's then talking to James Cromwell, who has basically taken all the joy out of this sport, which was just like this harmless pastime to all these local communities. Bernard Cribbins talks about it. He goes like, and you become such an arrogant idiot, but I'm a fan though. And he talks about his stats and what a wonder to the game he was back in the day and how he used to admire him. And he could just pivot between these two things in what was a knockabout kind of just silly comedy of the highest order, but so much fun for it. And then he brought this depth to it through these kind of really personal moments of revelry. And then the next minute they'd be jumping into the water to fish out the bowling balls, which they chucked into the water. And just it could just pitch it like that. He was just so fantastic at parts like that, and added something greater to it in something which should have been just this fun little film. He had some gravitas to it in an important way, I think.
Well, you've inspired me to go find it, which I will.
And it's still funny as hell as well. Like you've got this just sorry, I'm just going to go off piece here. We've got this one scene where Paul Kay rolls this ball and he's doing these wild trick shots, and he turns and goes, "Yeah, well, okay, well played," to the guy playing. He goes, but the ball's still moving. He goes, "Oh yeah, come on, look, no point being so sorely. The ball's still moving." It's like, right, okay. And he runs along and talks through all the ways the ball's going to go. And he'll go to the left, round there, and then onto the Rizzler paper I've just placed on the ground there. And he talks about it. And Ian McNeice plays the bowler, Churchill from Doctor Who. And
lovely Ian McNeice.
Wonderful cast. You'll love it. So let's move on to David Warner.
One more Cribbins performance.
Please.
Which shows a different side from what we've talked. We've talked charming. We've talked, delightful. His guest turn in Fawlty Towers, the hotel inspectors, is a pernickety, annoying, just glorious, and it's glorious. Also, the fact because sometimes Greshers, it's very hard to be a character actor because they come with so much baggage. You totally, whilst at the same time going, and it's Bernard Cribbins, but he's so that he has his cake and eats it. You love him for the fact that it's Bernard Cribbins, but you also totally buy him. This customer from who Basil Fawlty, the brilliant conceit is that the hotel inspector in town. So this pernickety customer, Basil thinks is the hotel inspector, so has to be really obsequious. So he gets even more demanding, and then Swiss is, of course, he's not. He's just a twat.
Spoon seller.
Yeah, it is a fantastic. I would say before Wilfred Mott came along, if you'd asked me to pick a performance for Cribbins, I would choose his spoon salesman from Fawlty Towers. But
the thing which is so
a completely different turn to all the other ones,
And it also does something of like he's being this insufferable hotel guest, which I think anyone would have had issues with. But that works perfectly, obviously, alongside Cleese's Fawlty, who's just wound up by anything even minor. And you sort of like at the same time as he's being an annoying character, he's also piercing the pomposity of this other kind of really annoying, ridiculous character at the same time.
That's because actually in certain points, the customer sort of has a point because Basil is so awful that you find yourself your sympathies change between these two men who are both awful in different ways, and yet you kind of both like them both in different ways.
Yes, that's brilliant. I mean, if he'd been any more annoying, it would have stepped on that other note. He had to play it just right. Wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you for mentioning that one.
Precision, character, and comedy. Which and the sad thing about that is the really good look easy, and it's not.
Yeah. And I think I'm not one to say this very often about things, but I think Fawlty Towers is something which has unfortunately been a victim of PC more than I think it was a foul of PC, because a lot of the stuff was in irony and was in mocking of the people with these ridiculous views, but because they talk about these ridiculous views,
it's really hard through a modern lens, and it's our generation because we were brought up in the shadow of that, where some of that awful stuff was sort of day-to-day expression, and
yes,
you wanted to fight against it. So then when you saw something like Fawlty Towers sending it up, well, a lot of the phraseology and stuff was part of the vernacular just used casually and badly. Yeah. So when Fawlty Towers used it used it to send up those characters, and it took and for a very long time I was like, oh, these young people, they don't understand it. But then of course when you talk to young people, they find that language shocking, because in a way society has done some of the job in that particular area that it was supposed to do, which is to make some of that stuff that we didn't necessarily like but we're used to hearing now seem absolutely awful. And it's harder, if you haven't grown up as we did in the shadow of that, to not think, oh my God, that's just really offensive. So it's a really tricky one. It's a really tricky one.
But some of the use of language, yes, okay, I agree that should not be played now, but it's just like when he's clearly the butt of the joke when he's saying these awful things to these German people. He is the guy in the wrong. He is the idiot. That's why he's saying it. The Germans are the sensible people in the scenario. Yeah, and that's unshowable now as a result. Which I
absolutely. And I sometimes I've got two very I've got two very sincere young men as children, and you sometimes have to say, Just because a writer or an actor shows something, it doesn't mean they approve of it. They're showing it to you for you to make that choice. And the mere depiction of it isn't an effrontery to you. Do you know what I mean? You should be able to go, oh, this is a piece of fiction drama where these characters are being shown in order for us to reach a conclusion about them. But I fear we're at the moment we're in slightly different times where I wish sometimes creatives were given the benefit of the doubt.
Yes,
but I think we're at a funny old time, and the sincerity from all angles. We just need to negotiate it, I think, with slightly more understanding in every direction.
I agree. So David Warner, 228 credits, 60 years in acting, member of the Royal Shakespeare Company, 2 Star Trek movies and 1 TV episode, a plethora of audio dramas, and he got to be on Doctor Who, a Doctor Who on audio, as well as appearing in many of the best loved films and stage shows of our day. Again, like, to lose one of these legends within a week could be said to be careless. To lose 2, it's just, we're losing too many of these huge figures. I believe you worked with David in a few of the audios, am I correct?
Yeah, quite a few. So the first time I met him was on a thing called Intelligent Design, which wasn't a Doctor Who. It was a play that Big Finish did a series of sort of one-off dramas. This was something that had been written by Geoffrey Beevers, and Lisa Bauman cast me opposite Geoffrey. It was pretty much a two-hander. But there was some. And no, Daisy Ashford was it as well. So it's a three-hander. And Lisa got me in for that because I'd done the audiobook of Rob Shearman's Love Songs for the Shy and Cynical that Lisa had directed, and I'd sort of known Lisa through conventions and stuff like that. And she and I are both very similar when it comes to the acting talent of the United Kingdom. Is that we go, you know, so and so, and she's very much sort of wired in the same way that I am in regards to, you know, remembering the names of all actors that have been in everything, and she got David in to the voice of God was needed at the end, and she got David in to do that. He's not credited on the thing or anything, but you know it's him, because who else would you have to play God in the Big Finish universe? So I met him on that, and he was lovely. And Lisa had primed him that I might be a bit giddy because he was in so many of my favourite films and gave so many of my favourite performances. I mean, he really was my favourite. He and Ian Holm, I think, were my 2 favourite. You know, taking Doctor Who out of the equation, my 2 favourite sort of actors, certainly on film as a kid, and then Big Finish. David Richardson at Big Finish sent an email saying, keep this under your hat, because I don't think Tom Baker's audios had been announced at that point, because there was a bit of a back and forth for a while about whether he'd do them. And they said, we're doing a series of, or a few series of Tom Baker's, and for one of them we've got a recurring set of villains. David Warner's playing one of them, and would you like to be the other? I just went, that's the best
you were
thing.
his you was lackey to his evil overlord.
And it's not quite there's a pair of villains. There's a villain and there's a sidekick. But I don't care. If they'd said, will you be David Warner's mute sidekick, I'd have done it.
I mean, but that's very Shakespearean. There was always the kind of evil lord, and then there was their henchman and their butler, or the person they talk to unlay their evil schemes.
I am happy to be a henchman.
It's great.
Me. And if you're henching David Warner, I mean, I wanted to be an actor because I like the idea of disguising and doing different voices and all that sort of thing. But largely is that I wanted to be part of that world, and I wanted to work with actors I admired. Now, I never dreamed I'd work with David Warner because he'd gone to Hollywood. He was in American stuff, So there was no way I thought I'd ever be in his orbit. So then, sharing the airwaves with him and getting to talk to him, and yes sir, no sir, 4 parsecs at warp speed, sir, all of that, whilst battling Tom Baker. I mean, my God, it doesn't get much better than that. And he was so nice. And we sort of kept in touch. We actually kept in touch more than I thought, because it's always difficult at this time that you don't want to make somebody's death about you. But also it's nice to acknowledge, oh, well, when I met them, they were nice and all of this sort of thing.
And it's a personal experience, which is
yeah. But so, we weren't great mates or anything like that. But I actually looked through our Facebook exchanges, and there were quite a few of them. And of course, and you read the amount of times that somebody goes, and next time we're in London, we must go for lunch. And you go, and I never bloody took him up on that. But when I was, he and I both suffer from psoriasis, the acute skin condition, and he talked about having that in the 70s when it was much less understood than it is now. He said, if you look at me in a lot of my films, the reason I have big cuffs and a cravat on or whatever is because I'm hiding the encroaching blight, as it were. And so when I maybe 18 months after we'd done the first Mr. Doric and Cuthbert, and I ended up in hospital, and my then wife came in and she said, look, I've been sent this, and it was a message from David to her just saying, can you pass this on to Toby? But he sent it to her to be nice to her as well. He didn't even know her, and it was because I was in physical pain and I was pretty miserable. It was really emotional getting that. And then when I did a run a couple of years later to raise some money for the Psoriasis Association, he sent me a very generous check that put the amount that I raised into a different league, and I was astonished and touched by that. So that's some of the sort of outside of the showbiz stuff, if you like, that shows that sometimes people go, oh yes, and he was a lovely person. No, he really was a lovely person.
Yeah, I mean, I've just got a little story which I played the interview just after he died last week, where I got to see him at Sci-Fi Weekender up in Great Yarmouth. I think it was there at that weekend. But anyway, he was just so lovely and giving of his time to everyone. He had it. I love when you hear someone go, because sometimes I'll just observe someone going around the meet and greets just to hear the stories they're telling from afar. And I love the fact that most of these wonderful celebrities, of course, which I think is just part of the job, have a couple of kind of like little lines or stories which they like to sneak in. And one of his, which he told a few times, which was just lovely, was he said, it's like, oh yeah, and I'd met Patrick, because he was talking about working with Patrick Stewart on Next Generation. He goes, I met Patrick when I was playing Hamlet and he wasn't. And that was just one of his little lines. It was just adorable. And then he'd of course give the self-deprecating second line of like, of course, Patrick now a multi-millionaire and I'm here, so anyway, so he'd have the little joke, and then he'd have the little self-deprecating thing, which was very British quality.
Very dry sense of humor, very self-deprecating, and it's totally unambitious, which is extraordinary. But it's a lesson, and you go, because a lot of actors wear their ambition on their sleeve and often not very attractively, and you go, oh no, that's the way to do it. Don't seem like you need it, don't put all your emotions into it, and things can just happen. And I think that's a very good lesson for life, because actually the more you rely on something or are desperate for something to happen, I think often the more you repel it. What I think the thing with Warner, though, is that I would have forgiven him for being difficult. A bit like John Hurt, who I never met, but I've only ever heard lovely things about. Both of them have on screen this really sort of prickly, edgy, slightly dangerous, often melancholic. They're obviously in touch with wells of despair. They obviously have at their disposal a lot of danger and volatility. So I would forgiven either for being the kind of, and I've heard stories and encountered actors. I won't mention the name of the actor, but and they're lovely stories as well. Of I saw actor X having a pint outside a pub, and I went up to him and said, "Oh, I really like you in that," and he told me to F off, and you sort of go, "Yeah," and I think that's quite fun as well, because actually sometimes an actor being a miserable git is quite fun. So you would expect sort of mercurial actors who've been able to do the gamut, from the most melancholic to the most sort of psychotic, and both Warner and Hurt did both so well, to in person be slightly difficult. I would have forgiven that. I would have expected that. I would have been happy to be in their orbit and just have to pussyfoot round slightly, because frankly their intellect and force of personality would dwarf mine. So why not? You just go, yeah. But actually he wasn't like that at all. He was totally disarming. He was totally ungrand. And this wasn't just a good actor who did some films. This was the Hamlet of his generation. The Hamlet that actually changed the way that Shakespeare could be seen to be done and viewed. This was the young actor who played Henry VI in the War of the Roses cycle, which was an enormous project in the 1960s, and again a paradigm shift in how Shakespeare was done and conceived, and he placed it. People who weren't theatre goers and all of that. I mean, we talk about a different time as well. So actually, what we talk about theatre goers is probably nonsensical now anyway, so it doesn't matter. But he made extraordinary achievements in theatre, and then went to the States and flew the flag for high quality British acting, and often popping up in stuff that could be deemed less illustrious fare. But I always find it odd when critics and people bring that. In fact, a friend of mine on Facebook put about a year ago, "Oh, one actor we don't talk about enough is David Warner. He's excellent." And somebody put, "Oh yeah, I'm sure he's really proud of Teenage Mutant Heroes 2." And you go, "Who the hell are you? What are you saying? Should we put a line through all the brilliant films he's done because he did one film that you want to be?"
Also, to me,
good in that film.
To me, this is something I say repeatedly. I think real actors don't turn their nose down at genre stuff. Now, you can question whether or not Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 was the best film ever, but I don't remember it that well, I will be honest with you, but I will bet you bottom dollar his performance was amazing in it, because he didn't look down on kind of what the setting of it was.
Who decides? An actor, why does an actor have to be, this idea that an actor has to be sort of pure? It's a job where even the most illustrious, successful actors have to hustle and have periods out of work, and there's no benchmark that says an actor has to do jobs that are deemed to be of a certain quality or in a certain genre. The only thing you would ask of them, actually, and some actors don't do this, is that when they do something that they think is beneath them, phone in the performance, or aren't committed, or are paying to be around. David Warner never once gives the impression in any of his performances that he's slumming it or that he's phoning it in. And that's what you want of an actor. You want an actor to give a really good performance, whatever they're in. They don't have to have a view as to the quality of what it is they're doing. And frankly, it's not a place to settle scores, but people whose attitude that is, like, oh yeah, they did that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, and did you never have a day at work when you worked on a project that you weren't necessarily entirely sure about, but you've got to bloody work? And also, from growing up when Doctor Who is in the hiatus, I encountered quite a few actors, and I say, "Oh, you were in Doctor Who," and they go, "Yeah, that was a load of old rubbish." Who subsequently, when Doctor Who was really successful again, I saw being interviewed, and they go, "Do you know, I was in Doctor Who in the old days, marvelous." And you go, oh, "All right," but yeah, David Warner had, again, every right to sort of go, "Well, just Doctor Who, and I've done a bit of Babylon 5 and a bit of Star Trek." No, and I know from speaking to him, he didn't take every job that he was offered. He chose what he wanted to do. He chose to do those things, and he did them really well, and lots of people really love them. So
yeah, and it's worth saying as well, like, I would have sworn watching his performance in I'm a particular fan of his performance in Star Trek: The Next Generation. One episode, he plays a torturer, and it's so moving and so powerful. And you see this torturer getting dispowered by Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, who just sort of doesn't buy into it, and that's enough to dispower this guy who's used to being of great power at all times. And it's very King Lear-esque, actually, now I talk about it in these terms. But he said to me when I interviewed him, he had only got the script for that 3 days before, and there were bits of lines all around. I would have sworn he had rehearsed that for weeks. He had researched tortured characters. He had done this, that, and the other. And he said kind of similarly about his Unbound Doctor Who on Doctor Who Audio. And again, I would have thought the kind of amount of reverence that's in that performance, that he'd watched loads of Doctor Who in preparation, done this, that, and the other, but he just played the truth of the situation.
He could just do it, the bastard.
Yes.
And he's called Gul Madred, isn't he, in Chain of Command? And he also is brilliant because he's so polite at the beginning of that and so sort of reasonable, but there are flashes of kind of, but you're toast, mate. He's charming and he enjoys the villainy, but never to the expense of its impact. It's a really, I watched it the other night, and God, he's so good in it. It's such a good performance, and it's 1984. It's Winston Smith and O'Brien. You know, how many fingers am I holding up, Winston? Instead of that, it's how many lights am I showing you? So it's an old piece of kit, really. But it's David Warner and it's Patrick Stewart doing it, and you go, ho, 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 ho. And as you say, he'd got the script 3 days before, but it's just because he was good.
Yes, yeah, just rudely good almost in that.
Yeah.
I mentioned there his version of Doctor Who on audio dramas, and I thought this was so wonderful because Big Finish is actually not only is Big Finish just wonderful in every respect, but what they do amazingly is they have some sets which are based on the companion, quote unquote, being the main character and the Doctor being subordinate. And they find these wonderful ways of doing it. But his Doctor was so up for it because he came from it was basically Marvel's What If in the modern parlance, where he would be like in any one of these Unbound stories would tell, what if the Doctor ... In this one, what if the Doctor had stayed on Earth, I believe it was in his original one, and then he'd not really become the Doctor in the same way all the other ones did. He'd just become this fallen disgrace of a Doctor. The universe had basically ended on his watch, is what we found out when we re-encounter him, where he's being sort of the secondary character he becomes to Lisa Bauman as Beneath Sunfield.
Yeah.
And it seemed the perfect Doctor to do that with, because he is so flawed. He needs to learn from the companion what it is to be the Doctor. Even though he's meant to be the Doctor, he doesn't really know what it is to be it, but he's trying, and he's trying his best to be. And it was just such a wonderful setup. And he played that flawed nature of the character so well, whilst just giving that little shine of the Doctor, which just kept it as the same character somehow.
And isn't it lovely that the range sort of, had the ambition to go, well, let's do something a little bit sideways. And you go, oh gosh, that's going to be curious. And then they go, yeah, but we're going to be doing it with David Warner. And you go, oh, okay. And I mean, he'd been an actor that Peter Davison had suggested for the role of the Doctor years and years ago. And I'd always thought, oh yeah, he would be really, really good. So the fact that we got him, albeit,
Yes, didn't he go up for the 8th Doctor, or was it certainly in the conversations? I don't know if it was ever confirmed if he went for it.
I don't think he ever went up for it, but I don't think he ever went up for it.
I think Paul McGann might have said in an interview that he knew that he wanted to go for it, and
okay.
I don't know if it ever happened, but maybe it was just an expressed interest.
Yes, I don't know. Is the so?
Which, by the way, Bernard Cribbins also went for it.
Whose name was always bandied about, wasn't it?
Yeah, Bernard Cribbins. Sorry, he also told that story on Loose Ends where he went for it under Barry Letts.
Yes, that's right.
And it became Tom Baker instead. When he was told the reason why they didn't hire him was because he's ex-military and there's no fighting in Doctor Who. And then he said, and then next time I see Tom Baker on the screen, he's judo chopping some Venusian or something.
Yeah, so actually, the two men we're talking about were both potential Doctors, and both would have been excellent.
Yeah. Sorry, no, that's a bit of a tangent. Oh yeah, we spoke about his history, yeah, both in Shakespeare and also on Big Finish. And they did a Shakespearean Ranger one stage where he played King Lear.
Yeah.
And what I really loved about that performance, not only is just all the grandness of King Lear and all the foolishness and hubris, but I think he also made it probably the least it was a very likable performance, but not a likable character. And he wasn't afraid to do that. And he let the other people bring out his humanity as opposed to him trying to force a likability to an unlikable character in places.
Good observation. Yes, that's very nicely put. Yes. And of course, doing it on audio affords you, I think, slightly more introspection and less bombast than the stage might bring out as well. But of course, he did do it on stage. I'd love to have seen it. I mean, again, you sort of kick yourself because when he was back in the UK, he did do stuff on stage. King Lear, didn't he? And he played Falstaff. Went back to the RSC, and an old mate of mine played Jeff Stretfield that I was at college with. Played Howell to his Falstaff. So why the hell I didn't go to see that? I was too busy going, oh, shall I go to the pub? You know, oh, Stratford, it's a bit on the train. You know, you look back now and you go, I'm the same person who didn't go and see Bill Hicks when he was up the road doing, you know, so what on earth was I thinking?
Yeah. A couple of his films, so The Omen, such a classic. Fairly minor part in the grand scheme of the film, but very memorable. He played the
really important part.
Really important. Yeah, he discovered the weapons or the methods of death appearing in the photographs.
And he's a marked man. You know, there's the photos that get developed that have the premonition of death about them, and he does have that air about him. There's a slight weird vulnerability. That suggests if something awful hasn't happened to him, it's probably just about to. And I don't know how you convey that, but he had that. The Omen is odd because it's one of those films that everybody talked about. Especially, I have older brothers, so I sort of knew the film before I'd even seen it because, you know, when it was on too late for me to watch it, other people watched it and then talked about it. So by the time I watched it, I sort of felt like I'd already seen it, and yet still I couldn't quite believe that anything, you know, you still rooted for it's called Keith Jennings, isn't he? You still rooted for him, and thought, well, no, surely he's not. And then that scene where he does get killed is an extraordinary shock moment. Having already lost Patrick Troughton impaled by a spike. Yes. Great film.
Time After Time, a favorite of mine always. It's got those wonderful sci-fi elements, but it really feels like a very gripping paced drama as well. Like you've got and it's just the most high concept of concepts, where he's playing Jack the Ripper, who follows H.G. Wells, or no, Nick's H.G. Wells' time machine. H.G. Wells has to follow him into the future, and then you've got them chasing, and it's just wonderful. It's just so good, better than it's probably got any right to be. Really,
it's a brilliant. Well, I say it's a brilliant film. I've watched it once. I should think 38 years ago. And I'm not sure I want to watch it again because I have such fond memories of watching it. I know who was in the room. I know the conversations we had afterwards. I know there's a little bit of a subtitle at the end explaining that H.G. Wells married somebody, and it's a clever little sort of thing. And you go, oh, and I remember us talking about that, but also how plausible and genuinely scary a villain David Warner was in it, and he's a genuine threat, and you worry for anybody that's in his orbit in that film. And as I say, we want to recapture our childhoods so often. I think some things are almost better left there because of what they represent. But I would be curious to see it again. But it had such a profound effect. And I know we as a family, again, slightly dysfunctional and with bits missing family, were all absolutely gripped by this movie when it was shown on telly one time, to the extent I can vividly remember aspects of it and the conversation we had, 38 years later.
I mean, I'll actually couple this one up slightly with a film which comes much later, which is Titanic, only because I feel like he's probably remembered more for Titanic now. However, he did a wonderful job in Titanic. I would take nothing away from his performance. However, I feel like that's almost an easy part for him. He's playing a henchman. He's playing a baddie. He can do that in spades. He could do that performance in his sleep, whereas something of time after time, there was a lot more he had to echo the desperation which he had, but also he was a tactician, a thinker, so he'd always be 2 moves ahead of H.G. Wells. And it's kind of funny that, I mean, if you like him in Titanic, please do check out Time After Time. He gets to do even more of that. Let me put it that way.
Definitely. I mean, Titanic, I mean, I went to see that a number of times. It was a massive film when it came out.
Yeah.
And I was just thrilled that the film that was on everybody's lips, and everybody was all excited about Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, and I've always looked a bit below the title for my thrills. And you've got Bernard Hill, and it's actually a lovely performance from a Scottish actor called Ewan Stewart, who plays Officer Murdoch. But and the fact that David Warner is the bad guy, and I was thrilled that my favourite actor, even in this, was in this big film that everybody was talking about. And I go, and my guy's in it, but as you say, it's the sort of part he could do in his sleep. But that's not to denigrate him. That just shows how good he was.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to anyone else, that would be a challenging performance, I'm sure. But he just done so much else. It just seems like that for you is easy. For the rest of us, maybe not. But for you.
Yeah.
Getting on to some comedic roles. So he was in Time Bandits as not a full-out comedic role, but a buffoon of a bad guy.
Oh, it's very funny. But that's the secret. It's not a comedic performance in a way, which is what makes it so funny.
Yes.
You prick pomposity by making it absolutely believe in itself, and he's so funny. I was watching the scene where his minions ask him the stupid questions, about, well, who created you, and he goes, good question, bang, and just kills them, and it's very funny. It's great. It's and that sort of seething anger that he does so well. But again, anger is funny if you do it right. Yeah, very good. But never losing sight of the fact that he has to be a plausible threat.
No, exactly. The other one that I wanted to throw out, which it's one of my favorite comedies, and it was actually Barry Norman said was his favorite comedy when he was asked on the film program, The Man with Two Brains.
Two Brains, yes, Dr. Necessiter.
I mean, it was quite funny actually, because usually I'm like you. I prefer the actor to play the most silly thing straight, which makes it even funnier. However, I've got to say, in that movie, like Steve Martin, he does play it for laughs, and he's very good at it, and he's one of those exceptions for the rules who can get away with it. If anything, actually, I'd say he's even got funnier though with stuff like Only Murders in the Building, because he only murders in the building, because he does get to sometimes play a couple of serious notes in there. But anyway, sorry, that's by the by. But David Warner, I mean, it's literally his finger stuck to his face in one scene, and he's playing it absolutely straight.
That's it.
Doesn't do it for a laugh at all.
And there's the bit where he shows what the gorillas are doing, doesn't he? When he's put the brain into some subject, and he does this sort of absolutely ludicrous kind of movement, but then goes back to being completely straight again. So he's not averse to doing the really over-the-top nonsense stuff, but then returns to the straight-faced immediately afterwards, and that's what makes it really funny. And because you don't expect him to horse around, that makes it even funnier. It's a great film, man, with two brains.
Absolutely fantastic. It stands up still to this day. It doesn't date itself with stuff which a lot of films of any time, let's face it, but the 80s, it was usually they'd have to have some woman getting the boobs out for no good reason. They'd have to have some politically correct thing at the time. There'd be all these little moments, whereas I can't think of any examples in that film. I'm sure if you watch it, there is something you can find, but not much at all.
It's great. It's because it's just daft.
yeah.
High quality daft. Brilliant.
We have to mention Tron. So CGI before we knew what CGI was, really.
Yeah.
So high concept. So again, this is another sort of film which you feel like some actors would have just completely turned their noses up at and missed out on a wonderful kind of very off-kilter film, which is still loved to this day.
Yeah, and you needed somebody like him to sort of anchor it, really. And you know, American cinema learned early that the heft and ballast given to you by a English Shakespearean actor is not to be sniffed at, and it somehow gives everything an air of class when an audience might instinctively be sniffy about something that is new or slightly way out. I'm not saying that's necessarily to our credit, but it does mean that there's work to be had for quality British thesps to sort of provide that counterpoint, and so everybody's happy. It was sort of, you know, it's reassuring to see him in it amongst all of this stuff that was so way out and so new. Oh yeah, that guy, yeah, we know where we are with him.
And yet you have to give it credit that every performance, but, you know, I'm sure David was a wonderfully anchoring a presence on the set, but everyone's taking it just so seriously for something which is so out there. You know, God knows what they saw on the day compared to what we saw in the cinema. You know, they're probably there with tennis balls and, you know, just blank backgrounds, or, you know, green screen or whatever, or blue screen it would have been back then. And just everyone was just so invested in a way I don't think many sci-fi films of the time might be.
No, you absolutely have to be. You know, let's not forget, Shakespeare is about witches and ghosts.
Yes.
You know, that sort of stuff. And the reason it has witches and ghosts is because it's trying to make the conversation and the emotions and the stakes on a higher, more metaphysical realm. And that's what sci-fi is doing. Otherwise, you'd set it in a chip shop. Do you know what I mean? It's about saying the stakes are slightly higher, and the canvas we're on is slightly more is more metaphysical and larger. And so you need an actor that's used to doing big metaphysical speeches, and those are the Shakespeareans, you know. And we somehow we do them well, you know, and so that then grounds it, yet it retains its grandeur whilst being grounded, if that's not an oxymoron.
No, not at all. Just two more, which I'm going to quickly mention. One is him as the voice of Raja Gould in Batman the Animated Series. I think that is a wonderful example of how animation got to be taken seriously as it does today. The whole cast of that show, even the guest parts, were amazing actors, and Dave Warner, of course, is no exception to that. And just this again, it's very Shakespearean kind of character, I suppose. You were talking about the demons and the ghosts and all this. This is a guy who's brought back to life through a resurrection pit every night, but he had to have that Shakespearean tone of this very serious character, this leader of men, because he had the League of Assassins, which worked under him. He was trying to hire, like he wasn't like all the other bad guys trying to kill Batman. He was trying to hire Batman for his league of people who go around killing the right people, essentially.
Well, I'll take your word for it, because I'll have a confession. I do not know about. I don't actually know anything about science fiction or television, so I've not had the pleasure of Batman the Animated Series.
I'd just like to throw that one in.
I know. I'll take your word for it.
And finally, just we mentioned Star Trek before. He was in Star Trek 5 and 6. Star Trek 5, he actually said it was his favorite one because he didn't have to wear any prosthetics. And we did say it's like William Shatner must love to hear that. He goes, yes, I tell him every time I see him. Whereas Star Trek 6, his performance as Chancellor Gorkon, with the pasty head, as is wont for a Klingon, he had all this elaborate makeup on, of course. And just such a wonderful, it is a Shakespearean style role, and it even references Shakespeare.
You can't appreciate Shakespeare until you've heard it in the original Klingon, which is a nonsense line, but very funny. And of course, it's the undiscovered country. Its title is a Shakespeare quote, and and Christopher Plummer's character spouts Shakespeare throughout, doesn't he? His last words, let's slip the dogs of war. So the fact that you've got Plummer, who I know he was Canadian, wasn't he? But I think we always felt, I don't know, there was a feeling that he was English. I think we pretended he was ours.
I think so, yeah.
So you've got Plummer and Warner there, amongst the Star Trek crew again, giving it a sort of. I remember being disappointed that he was killed off so quickly. But that character's, but that's not because it was a small role. It needed a big actor in that role.
It was the impetus for the whole film.
Yeah, you needed to feel that loss. So you needed, as a viewer, to be slightly disappointed. I don't know quite what he's doing in Star Trek V, but I think he is actually the most memorable thing about it, just because of that slightly sort of disillusioned, crabby air that he's got. And again, he was one of those actors that could smoke a cigarette as if it was suggesting that his life had been utter abjectness.
Yes.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but you're totally right. But it's in Star Trek 6 again. It's that scene where they're all around the dinner table, and Chekhov even jokes, "Guess who's coming to dinner?" And it feels like that must be what every uncomfortable ambassadorial dinner which any politicians ever had with a country they're still at war at, or they're still in peace talks with, or they've got an uncomfortable history with. And I've actually been watching The Crown recently, and there's so many scenes which are reminiscent of that, and it captures that. You forget that they're Starfleet and Klingons. They're two warring people around a dinner table who are trying beyond hope to make this work. And it just so happens the captain of the Enterprise is the biggest war criminal as far as the Klingons are concerned ever. So just everything that's loaded into that scene, and Warner just, of course, knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's fantastic.
Toby, thank you very much for joining us.
We've got to mention, because the viewers who may be watching this because they've been drawn to David Warner's work via the sci-fi, I would urge them to any of the Peckinpah films, but the one that isn't talked about enough is one called Cross of Iron, which is set in the German trenches and has a lot to say about the futility of war. And Warner plays a dishevelled, chain-smoking, glassy-eyed captain who is sort of cynical about the whole process, but in whom James Mason, as his commanding officer, sees some hope for the future. And the final scene between the two of them is an absolute masterclass. And David Warner is so good in that. He has a sort of there's a beautiful moment bestowed upon him, and he has a sort of wretched gratitude about him that just says so much. It's not mawkish at all. And also you can find on YouTube, if you like a bit of classical theatre, the BBC had a series called Performance where they put on plays, but they just do them in the multi-camera studio. And Chekhov's Uncle Vanya, which has a cast to die for. Uncle Vanya is played by David Warner, Astrov by Ian Holm, Sabraikov by Ian Bannon, and even Dr. Runciman from Mordred Undead is in it. But if there was a part that David Warner was born to play, it's the tragicomic man whose life is ultimately a failure. It's David Warner's. He's perfect as Vanya, and he was doing this at the time that he was doing a lot of those sort of. I think the story goes that he was having lunch with Ian Holm, and Ian Holm said to him, he said to Ian Holm, "What are you doing next?" And Ian Holm said, "Well, I'm very choosy, so I'm doing this Kafka thing directed by this high-end director. What are you doing next?" And David said, "Teenage Mutant Heroes Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze." And I can hear him say "Secret of the Ooze." But the pair of them are magnificent in it, and that's on YouTube. And David Warner is so good in it, and it's a great way to avail yourself of a bit of high quality BBC Chekhov. So I think those are two super performances.
Well, thank you. I've got those to check out. You've got Black Ball to check out. So we've given each other a recommend from this, which is always good. And by the way, I did read, and I wasn't aware of this until now, that Lisa Bauman was partnered to David Warner in the end.
Yes.
So just sending lots of love out to Lisa, who's just such a wonderful, lovely, giving person herself. And to, of course, all the families of both these legends, Bernard Cribbins and David Warner.
And sadly, as we record, it was David's birthday yesterday. He'd have been 81. Yes.
It gets used very often, but we really will not see the likes of them again.
No.
Such amazing performers. Thank you very much for joining us, Toby. Do you have anything you'd like to plug before we go?
Well, no, there's bits I haven't talked about David here, not just because of the constraints of time, that you can listen to. I put out an emergency episode of my podcasts, Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, which you can find out anywhere. The latest one, or the one before the latest one, is a sort of 40-minute reminisce and observations about David and his work, and it's called Indefinable Magic Number 18, Good Night, Sweet Prince, and it's all about my encounters with David and my observations about some of his performances. So check those out if you like. Please do.
And guys, if you're watching this on the video version, please do check out the audio version of this, which will be going out. I'm going to mix in some tunes relevant to the gents from their different productions, and of course Bernard's song. Please do listen. You can listen every Tuesday, 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. sw20radio.co.uk, the Dr. Squee Show. Toby, actually, is there something I can play for you to come out of this interview?
Oh gosh, what? Any piece of music?
Anything you like.
Oh well, Mr. Blue Sky from ELO. Then it's got to be.
Excellent. I believe you chose that last time, but always a perennial.
Oh, did I?
No, great one to pick.
So predictable.
Excellent. Toby Hadoke, take care. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Dr. Squee. That was my show. Until next time, please remember, look up. Just going to awkwardly look up while I try and find the end stream button.